I spent $47,000 I didn't have on my daughter's wedding, and she thanked me by saying, "My chosen family are those who make me happy." Everyone applauded. She looked at me and said, "You can leave." I stood, but the groom rose too, and what he did next left everyone stunned. The money I earned scrubbing other people's toilets at 3 a.m. while my daughter slept in her downtown apartment with its granite countertops and walk-in closet. And in return, in front of everyone who mattered to her, she looked me dead in the eye and told me to get out. My name is Michelle Howard, and this is the story of the worst night of my life and how it became the catalyst for the most important thing I've ever done. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who forgot to say thank you, if you have ever felt invisible in the presence of the person you love most, stay with me. Because what happened in that ballroom changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands of parents who thought they were alone in their pain. Let me take you back to that night, to the moment before everything shattered and changed at the same time. The Grand Celestial Ballroom lived up to its name. I'll give Juliet that much. When my daughter dreamed, she dreamed in ivory and gold, in crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across tables draped in silk. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, painted with cherubs and clouds that made you feel like you were dining in heaven itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the late spring sunset painting everything in shades of amber and rose. I sat at table 14, tucked near the back corner where the acoustics went a little fuzzy and the view of the head table required craning your neck at an uncomfortable angle. Not the family table. That honor went to John's parents, his siblings, his grandmother who'd flown in from Connecticut. My table held distant cousins I hadn't seen in 15 years, a few of Juliet's college friends who'd been bumped from the inner circle tables, and an elderly couple I'd never met, who I think were friends of John's parents. I didn't complain about the placement. I never complained about anything Juliet decided. That was our dynamic, had been for years now. I showed up, I smiled, I stayed quiet, and I hoped that maybe this time she'd look at me the way she used to when she was small, like I hung the moon just for her. My dress was cream-colored, bought from a consignment shop 3 towns over where nobody would recognize me. The tag inside still said Nordstrom, which made me feel slightly less self-conscious, even though the hem had been taken up unevenly and there was a small stain near the left hip that I'd covered with my clutch purse whenever I stood. My shoes were the same ones I'd worn to my cousin's funeral 2 years ago, the black pumps with the worn-down heel that clicked unevenly when I walked. I'd gotten my hair done, though. That was my one splurge, $65 at the salon where I used to clean on Thursday nights, where the stylist, Mariana, had known me long enough to give me the family discount without making me feel like charity. She'd curled it, pinned it up with small pearl clips that she insisted I keep. "You're the mother of the bride, Michelle," she'd said, her hands gentle in my hair. "You deserve to feel beautiful," I'd cried in her chair. Quietly, so the other customers wouldn't notice, but she'd seen. She'd squeezed my shoulder and handed me tissues and didn't ask questions I couldn't have answered anyway. Now, sitting in this palace of a ballroom, my hair still holding its shape, I felt beautiful and exhausted in equal measure. My feet ached in the old shoes. My face hurt from smiling. My hands, rough and reddened from years of industrial cleaning chemicals, looked out of place wrapped around the delicate stem of a champagne flute I hadn't dared to sip from. At $70 a bottle, I couldn't justify drinking something that cost more than my grocery budget for a week. Around me, the reception hummed with that particular energy of a very expensive party where everyone was determined to have exactly the right amount of fun. The band, a 12-piece ensemble that Juliet had insisted was essential, played something jazzy and sophisticated. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. At the head table, Juliet glowed in her dress, a custom Vera Wang gown that had required 3 fittings and cost more than my first car. She looked like a princess. She looked happy. That should have been enough for me. Isn't that what mothers are supposed to want? Our children's happiness no matter the cost? But sitting there, watching her laugh with her new husband John and her bridesmaids, women with trust funds and summer houses who'd never worked a day in their lives, I felt something I'd been pushing down for months finally surface. Not quite resentment, not quite sadness. Something in between, something that tasted like loneliness and felt like invisibility. I'd been in this ballroom for 3 hours. Juliet hadn't spoken to me once, Not during the cocktail hour, when I'd stood awkwardly by the bar, nursing a glass of water while her friends took selfies and laughed about inside jokes I didn't understand. Not during dinner, when I'd eaten my filet mignon alone while the people at my table made stilted conversation about the weather and the declining quality of airline travel. Not during the first dance, when John had twirled Juliet across the floor and I'd waited for the traditional mother-daughter dance that never came. That part had been cut for time, according to the wedding planner's apologetic email. I told myself it was fine. She was busy. It was her day. I was just being sensitive. But mothers have instincts about their children, instincts that go bone deep and blood true. And every one of mine was screaming that something was wrong, that the careful distance Juliet had been maintaining these past few years was about to crystallize into something I couldn't ignore. The band finished their song, and the room settled into that expectant hush that meant someone was about to make a speech. John's father had already gone, delivering a warm, funny toast about his son's journey to finding love. John's best man had roasted him gently about his college years, drawing affectionate laughter. The maid of honor, Juliet's college roommate whose name I could never quite remember, had spoken about friendship and loyalty and chosen sisters. Now it was Juliet's turn. She stood, and the room erupted in applause. She looked radiant, composed, every inch the sophisticated bride she'd worked so hard to become. She wasn't the little girl who used to make me dandelion crowns anymore. She wasn't the teenager who'd cried in my arms when her first boyfriend broke her heart. She was someone I barely recognized. Someone who'd grown away from me so gradually that I hadn't noticed until the distance was insurmountable. She raised her champagne glass, and 200 people quieted to hear what she had to say. I smiled up at her from table 14, my hands folded in my lap, my heart already sinking. I should have trusted my gut. What came next would shatter me in ways I never imagined. "I want to start," Juliet said, her voice carrying that practiced confidence she'd developed somewhere between her junior year of college and her first corporate job, by thanking my chosen family. Chosen family. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and unexpected. I felt my smile falter, then forced it back into place. Maybe she meant everyone here. Maybe it was just a modern phrase, something people said now. I was 53 years old and admittedly out of touch with the language of Juliet's generation, but the way she said it, the emphasis on chosen, the slight pause before family, made my stomach clench. "To the people who have stood by me unconditionally," Juliet continued, turning to gesture at a table near the front where her closest friends sat, "who have celebrated every success and held me through every failure, who have loved me for exactly who I am, without trying to change me or mold me into someone I'm not." The table of friends erupted in cheers. There were 6 of them, 3 women and 3 men, all in their late 20s like Juliet, all dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I knew their names: Madison, the investment banker with the blonde highlights and the laugh that sounded like wind chimes; Trevor, who worked in tech and wore a Rolex that caught the chandelier light every time he moved; Sienna, whose father owned a chain of hotels and who'd never, to my knowledge, held an actual job; Parker, Chloe, and James, interchangeable in their privilege, their ease, their absolute certainty that the world would always bend in their favor. They were the ones who'd encouraged Juliet to have a destination bachelorette party in Napa Valley that cost $4,000 per person. They were the ones who'd convinced her that a small, intimate wedding meant 200 guests at a venue that required a year-long waiting list and a 6-figure budget. They were the ones who'd been there for every wedding planning session, every dress fitting, every tasting menu, while I'd been working double shifts to pay for it all. My hands found the cloth napkin in my lap, gripping it so tightly my knuckles went white beneath the table where no one could see. "These are the people," Juliet said, her voice warming with emotion that sounded rehearsed to my ears, "who have given me permission to be authentically myself, who have never judged me, never made me feel small, never put conditions on their love, never put conditions on their love." I felt the words like a blade between my ribs. Was that what she thought I'd done? Put conditions on my love? Me, who had loved her since before she was born, who had worked myself to exhaustion to give her everything she wanted, who had never, not once, told her she wasn't enough exactly as she was. A flash of memory, Juliet at 19, sobbing on my couch because her boyfriend had cheated on her. I'd called in sick to work, risking my job, losing a day's pay I desperately needed, to sit with her, to make her tea, to tell her she deserved better. I'd held her for 6 hours straight while she cried herself hoarse. When had Madison done that? When had Trevor canceled his plans to make sure my daughter knew she was loved? Another memory, Juliet's college graduation, her walking across that stage to receive her diploma. I'd been in the nosebleed section because I'd bought my ticket late. I'd been working 2 jobs and forgot the deadline, but I'd screamed her name louder than anyone. She'd looked up, found me in the crowd, and smiled. Actually smiled like she was proud I was her mother. That was only 7 years ago. When had that girl disappeared? I am so grateful, Juliet continued, and now I could see John's face from where I sat. He was watching his new wife with an expression I couldn't quite read, confusion maybe, or concern. His jaw was tight. His mother, sitting beside him, had stopped smiling. So incredibly grateful to be surrounded by people who bring me unconditional happiness. Unconditional happiness. The phrase felt like a weapon, each word carefully selected for maximum impact. Around me, I could feel the room's energy shifting. The couple at my table had stopped eating, their forks suspended halfway to their mouths. One of Juliet's distant cousins, a woman named Patricia, who I'd met exactly once, was staring at Juliet with wide eyes, then glancing at me, then back at Juliet, as if trying to solve a puzzle. The friends' table was oblivious, still cheering and raising their glasses, completely unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that something terrible was unfolding. Madison actually whooped, loud enough that several people jumped. Trevor shouted, "We love you, Jules," like this was a celebration, not an execution. "In life," Juliet said, her voice taking on that philosophical tone she used when she wanted to sound wise beyond her years, "we are told that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that we owe our loyalty to the people who raised us simply because they raised us." Oh God, my throat was closing. I couldn't swallow, couldn't breathe properly. The champagne flute in front of me blurred as my eyes filled with tears I absolutely could not let fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. "But I've learned," Juliet continued, and her eyes were scanning the room now, deliberately avoiding my table, my corner, my existence, "that family isn't about biology. It's about who shows up for you. Who celebrates your growth instead of resenting it? Who wants you to be happy on your own terms, not theirs?" A flash, Juliet at 16, angry because I wouldn't let her go to an unsupervised party 3 hours away. "You're ruining my life," she'd screamed. "You don't want me to be happy." I'd stood firm because I was terrified of drunk driving, of drugs, of all the things that could hurt my baby girl. She'd hated me for a week. Then she'd come home and hugged me and said, "Thanks for caring enough to say no, Mom." When had caring enough to say no become not wanting her to be happy? Another flash, her senior year of high school, when she'd wanted to apply to schools on the East Coast, expensive, private colleges, that would have bankrupted us both. I'd suggested the state university, excellent academics, half the cost, close enough that I could visit. She'd been furious, said I was holding her back, limiting her potential. We'd compromised on a private university in-state with a partial scholarship. I'd worked 3 jobs to cover the rest. She'd graduated with honors and no student loan debt. Was that resentment of her growth? Or was that just the math of what I could afford? "I want to surround myself with people," Juliet said, her voice growing stronger, more certain, "who bring light into my life, who lift me up, who make me feel seen and valued for who I truly am, not who they want me to be." John was definitely frowning now. His hand had moved to the table, his fingers drumming once, twice, a nervous gesture. His best man leaned over to whisper something, but John shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Juliet's face. The room had gone peculiarly quiet. Even the friends' table had stopped cheering, sensing perhaps that the mood had shifted into territory they didn't understand. Madison's smile had frozen on her face, looking suddenly less like joy and more like a grimace. "So today," Juliet said, raising her glass higher, "I want to toast a chosen family, to the people who have earned their place in my heart, not through obligation or guilt but through genuine love and support. Earned their place." The napkin in my lap was twisted beyond recognition now, a rope of fabric my hands were destroying while the rest of me sat perfectly still. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, so hard I thought surely the people at my table could hear it. Patricia was definitely staring at me now, her face a mixture of horror and pity that made me want to disappear into the floor. This wasn't spontaneous. The realization crashed over me with absolute certainty. Juliet had planned this. Every word was calculated, every phrase a deliberate grenade lobbed into our relationship, what was left of it. She'd written this speech, probably revised it multiple times, maybe even practiced it in front of Madison and Trevor, who told her how brave she was, how authentic, how important it was to set boundaries and speak her truth. And her truth, apparently, was that I, the woman who had given her life meaning, who had sacrificed everything, who had loved her with a ferocity that sometimes frightened me, had not earned my place in her heart. To surrounding yourself with people who want the best for you, Juliet said, her voice ringing clear and strong across the ballroom. To having the courage to choose happiness over obligation, to building a life with people who truly see you. She turned then, her eyes sweeping across the room, and I knew, God, I knew that she was looking for me, that whatever was coming next was meant for me specifically, a final blow she'd been building toward this entire speech. Our eyes met across the expanse of ivory and gold, across 200 guests and a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. Her face was hard, resolved, nothing like the little girl who used to tell me I was her favorite person in the whole world. Nothing like the teenager who used to fall asleep with her head in my lap while we watched movies. Nothing like any version of my daughter I'd ever known. And sometimes, Juliet said, her voice dropping lower but somehow carrying even further in the terrible silence, choosing happiness means making hard decisions about who gets to be part of your story. The glass in her hand caught the light from the chandelier above, sending fractured rainbows across the white tablecloths, across the shocked faces of guests who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something they shouldn't be, something private being made devastatingly public. My hand stopped gripping the napkin, my breath stopped moving in my chest. The whole world narrowed down to my daughter's face, to her eyes locked on mine, to the 3 words I somehow knew were coming before she even opened her mouth. But before those 3 words fell like guillotine blades, before my world split into before and after, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know the years of sacrifice that built the foundation of Juliet's perfect life, the foundation she was about to publicly demolish. Let me take you back 26 years, to a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and grief. My husband Brian Howard died on a Tuesday afternoon. That detail shouldn't matter, but somehow it does. Tuesday, October 17, 1990. We'd been married for 4 years. Juliet had just turned 2 the month before, a small party in our apartment with a grocery store cake, and 3 other toddlers from the building. Brian had filmed the whole thing on our camcorder, laughing as Juliet smashed frosting into her hair. 3 weeks later, he was crossing the street on his way home from work when a driver ran a red light. The police said he died instantly, which I suppose was meant to be a comfort. It wasn't. I was 27 years old. I had a 2-year-old daughter, a 1-bedroom apartment I couldn't afford, and exactly $1,347 in our joint checking account. Brian's life insurance, the bare minimum policy his job provided, covered the funeral costs and 1 month's rent. After that, I was on my own. I remember standing in our apartment the week after the funeral, Juliet asleep in her crib, looking at the bills spread across our kitchen table. Rent, $650. Utilities, $120. Daycare, $480. Groceries, $200. Car insurance, $95. Gas, $60. The math didn't work. My job as a receptionist at a dental office paid $1,600 a month before taxes. Even if I cut everything to the bone, we'd be short at least $300 every month. I had 2 choices: ask my parents for help, my father who'd told me marrying Brian was a mistake, who'd refused to come to our wedding, or figure it out myself. The first cleaning job was at an office building downtown. I started at 11 p.m. and finished at 6 a.m., scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans and vacuuming endless hallways while the rest of the world slept. My neighbor, Mrs. Margaret, watched Juliet overnight for $20 a week, less than a quarter of what daycare charged, and only because she'd been a friend of Brian's mother. I'd go straight from the cleaning job to the dental office, arriving at 8 a.m. with my hair still damp from the quick shower I'd taken in the office building's bathroom. I'd work until 5 p.m., drive home in a fog of exhaustion, pick up Juliet from Mrs. Margaret, make dinner from whatever was cheapest at the grocery store, and play with my daughter for 2 precious hours before putting her to bed. Then I'd sleep for 3 hours and do it all again. That was my life for 4 years. I remember the exact moment my hands started bleeding. It was a Thursday night, no, Friday morning, 3 a.m., and I'd been scrubbing a bathroom on the 7th floor with industrial cleaner that the manager insisted was the only thing strong enough for the job. The skin on my knuckles had been dry and cracked for weeks, but that night the chemicals finally ate through. Blood mixed with the cleaning solution, pink water swirling down the drain. I wrapped my hands in paper towels and kept working. I couldn't afford to go home early. I was paid by the job, not the hour, and if I didn't finish, I didn't get the full $65. $65. That's what 6 hours of work paid. $11 an hour, no benefits, no sick days, no workers' compensation for hands that bled into cleaning solution. I bought antibacterial cream at the dollar store and wore rubber gloves after that. My hands still bear the scars, thin white lines across my knuckles that Juliet used to trace with her tiny fingers when she was small, asking me what happened. Mommy had a little accident at work, I'd tell her. But it doesn't hurt anymore. That was a lie. It hurt every time I washed my hands for years. By the time Juliet was 6, I'd added a second cleaning job, a restaurant that needed someone to come in after closing at 11 p.m. to deep clean the kitchen. The owner paid me $75 cash, 3 nights a week. Between that and the office building and the dental office, I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, total. I fell asleep on the bus once, missed my stop, and ended up 8 miles past my apartment. I woke up to the bus driver shaking my shoulder, concerned. "Ma'am, this is the end of the line. You okay?" I'd nodded, apologized, and waited 40 minutes for a bus going the other direction, crying silent tears the entire ride home because I'd lost an hour and a half of sleep I couldn't afford to lose. But Juliet never knew we were poor. That was my mission, my obsession. She had new clothes for school every year, clearance rack finds I'd bought in the wrong season and hidden until they fit her. She had birthday parties with her friends, modest but cheerful. She had Christmas presents under our scraggly tree, toys I'd bought at garage sales and cleaned until they looked new. And when she was 7 and came home from school talking about her friend's ballet class, talking about it with such longing in her voice that my heart broke, I found a way. The dance studio charged $125 a month. I didn't have $125 a month, but I talked to the owner, a stern Russian woman named Madame Petrova, and offered to clean the studio in exchange for Juliet's lessons. She looked at my rough hands, my exhausted face, and agreed. So, 3 mornings a week, I scrubbed floors and mirrors and bars before the students arrived, and 3 afternoons. A week I sat in a folding chair and watched my daughter, my beautiful, graceful daughter, dance. Those hours watching Juliet dance were the only time I felt like maybe I was doing something right. She was happy, she was thriving, she had something beyond just survival. I cleaned that dance studio for 6 years, until Juliet decided in 8th grade that she wanted to focus on academics instead. By then, my knees ached constantly from kneeling on hard floors. I was 39 years old and felt 60, but I'd given my daughter ballet. I'd given her that gift. High school was when things started to change between us. It was subtle at first. Juliet made friends with girls from the good neighborhood, girls whose parents were doctors and lawyers and executives. She started noticing that our apartment was smaller than theirs, that our car was older, that I worked jobs that required a uniform and name tag instead of a business suit and briefcase. I remember the first time she asked me not to come inside when I picked her up from a friend's house. She was 14. "Just text me when you're outside, okay, Mom?" she'd said, her voice carefully casual. "Brittany's parents are kind of formal. It's easier if I just meet you at the car." I'd sat in that car outside a house 3 times the size of our entire apartment building and understood she was embarrassed of me. I told myself it was normal teenage behavior. All kids went through phases where their parents weren't cool enough. It would pass. It didn't pass. By junior year, she'd stopped inviting me to school events unless they were mandatory. Parent-teacher conferences, yes. But not the drama club performances where she had small roles. Not the National Honor Society induction ceremony, not the college fair where I might have met her friends' parents and revealed exactly how far apart our tax brackets were. I kept telling myself, she's stressed about college applications. She's trying to figure out who she is. This is normal adolescent separation. She'll come back to me. College was supposed to be impossible. The guidance counselor had been kind but blunt. With my income, Juliet would qualify for financial aid, but not enough to cover a private university. The state school would be our best option. Good academics, affordable tuition, close enough that she could live at home and save on room and board. Juliet had other ideas. She'd gotten into Westfield University, a prestigious private school 3 hours away. The financial aid package covered about half the costs. The remaining half, tuition, fees, room, board, books, came to $28,000 a year. "It's my dream school, Mom," she'd said, her face glowing with hope. "Please. Everyone says it's the best place for pre-law. The connections I'd make, the opportunities. I can't get that at state." I wanted to say no. God, I wanted to say no. I was 45 years old with no retirement savings, still working 3 jobs, still living paycheck to paycheck. I had nothing left to give. But she was my daughter. My brilliant, ambitious daughter who'd worked so hard, who'd earned a 4.2 gigapascals and scored in the 95th percentile on her SATs through sheer determination. How could I be the one to crush her dreams? I took out Parent Plus loans. I added a 4th job, weekend shifts at a big box store stocking shelves. I moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment. I sold my car and took the bus everywhere. I ate 1 meal a day, telling myself I was trying to lose weight, not that I couldn't afford more food. I sent Juliet to Westfield University. She called me twice during her first semester, once to ask for money for textbooks I'd thought were covered, once to tell me she'd joined a sorority and needed $500 for initiation fees. I sent the money. I always sent the money. By her sophomore year, she'd stopped calling almost entirely. Our communication was text messages, brief, transactional, sometimes going weeks between replies. When she did come home for holidays, she spent most of her time with her high school friends, girls who went to schools like Westfield, who wore clothes from stores I couldn't afford to window shop in. I told myself, she's busy, she's building her life. This is what success looks like. I should be proud. I was proud, and I was heartbroken. Junior year, she brought a boyfriend home for Thanksgiving. His name was Chad, and his family owned a chain of car dealerships. He was polite to me, in that way wealthy people are polite to service workers, courteous but distant, making no real effort to know me. Juliet barely made eye contact with me the entire weekend, as if by acknowledging our relationship, she'd somehow diminish herself in his eyes. They broke up after 6 months. She called me crying, and for one beautiful afternoon I had my daughter back. She told me everything, how he'd cheated, how she should have seen it coming, how stupid she felt. I listened and comforted, and told her she deserved so much better. "Thanks, Mom," she'd said when we hung up. "You always know what to say." I held on to that sentence for months. Then came John. She met him during her first year of law school. She'd gotten into Georgetown, another dream school, another mountain of debt. John was in her study group, from a good family, working toward corporate law. Juliet called me gushing about him, more excited than I'd heard her in years. When she brought him home the first time, I understood why. John was different from Chad, from the other boys she'd dated. He was kind. He asked me questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. He helped me with dishes after dinner without being asked. He looked at Juliet like she was precious, but he also looked at me like I was a person, not an obstacle. "Your mother is wonderful," I overheard him tell Juliet that night. "You can tell she'd do anything for you." "Yeah," Juliet had replied, her voice oddly flat. "She would. Not grateful, not warm, just acknowledging a fact, like you'd acknowledge that the sky is blue or water is wet." The engagement happened on a beach in Santa Barbara. John planned the whole thing, flew Juliet out for a weekend, proposed at sunset. The photos were beautiful. Juliet in a flowing white dress, John on one knee, the ocean in the background like something from a movie. She called me 2 days later to tell me about it. Not right after it happened, 2 days later. After she'd told her friends, after she'd posted about it on social media, after it had gotten 500 likes and 100 congratulatory comments. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to call you," she'd said, laughing. "It's been so crazy. But yes, we're engaged. Can you believe it?" I could believe it. What I couldn't believe was that I'd been an afterthought, but I pushed that hurt down, deep where it couldn't interfere with her happiness. "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart," I'd said. John is wonderful. When are you thinking for the wedding? Next spring, she'd said. We want to do it before I graduate and start at the firm. Mom. She'd paused, and I'd heard something in her voice that made my chest tighten. It's going to be expensive. I know money is always tight for you. John's parents are paying for most of it, but there are some traditional things that the bride's family is supposed to cover, and I don't want you to stress if you can't. I'll handle it, I'd said immediately. Whatever you need. This is your wedding. We'll make it beautiful. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who forgot to say thank you, you understand what comes next. I liquidated my retirement fund, the small 401k I'd finally started contributing to 5 years earlier when I'd gone down to just 2 jobs and could afford to put away $50 a month. After penalties, it came to $8,200. I maxed out 3 credit cards, $5,000, $7,500, and $3,000. I borrowed $10,000 from my friend Rosa, who'd been cleaning offices alongside me for 20 years, and who'd somehow managed to save more than I had. I took out a personal loan for $15,000 at an interest rate that made the bank officer wince. Total, $48,700. Close enough to $50,000 that it might as well have been. The mother of the bride was traditionally responsible for the rehearsal dinner, the invitations, the flowers, and any shortfall in what the groom's family didn't cover. John's parents paid for the venue and the catering. Everything else fell to me. The flowers alone cost $6,000. Centerpieces for 30 tables, Juliet's bouquet, the bridesmaids, bouquets, boutonnieres, ceremony arrangements. The florist showed me cheaper options. Juliet rejected them all. Mom, this is my wedding. Can't we splurge just this once? The invitations. $1,800 for custom calligraphy and premium cardstock that Juliet insisted was essential for setting the right tone. The rehearsal dinner, $4,200 for 40 people at the restaurant Juliet's friends recommended. And on and on and on. A dress for me that met Juliet's approval, $600. Hair and makeup for the bridal party, $2,100. Programs, place cards, party favors, a videographer because the photographer wasn't enough, $8,400. Every time I suggested a less expensive option, Juliet's face would fall. Don't you want my wedding to be nice, Mom? John's family is paying for so much already. I don't want them to think we're cheap. So I said yes. To everything. To all of it. The wedding planning brought out a side of Juliet I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had seen it, growing slowly over the years, and I just refused to acknowledge it. She criticized everything about me. My suggestions were tacky. My taste was outdated. My inability to understand her vision was frustrating. When I showed up to a planning meeting with the wedding planner in my work clothes, I'd come straight from a shift. She'd pulled me aside afterward. Mom, couldn't you have changed? She'd hissed. Caroline charges $300 an hour. I need her to take us seriously. I took the bus straight here so I wouldn't be late, I'd said quietly. I didn't have time to go home. She'd sighed. That particular sigh that meant I was being difficult. Never mind, just try to look more put together next time, okay? I stopped going to planning meetings in person. I'd call in, participate over the phone, where Caroline the wedding planner and Juliet's friends couldn't see my cleaning uniform or my worn-out shoes. The arguments got worse as the wedding got closer. Juliet wanted to seat me at a table with distant relatives. It's not personal, Mom, it's just that the family table is really full with John's family, and you'll be more comfortable with people you actually know. I didn't know those relatives. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. But I nodded. Whatever makes the day easier for you, honey. God, why do you always do that? She'd snapped. Why do you always have to be so martyrish about everything? Martyrish. That's what my sacrifice looked like to her. Not love. Not devotion. Martyrdom. A guilt trip she hadn't asked for. I'd almost said something then. Almost told her exactly what I'd given up, exactly what this wedding was costing me in ways that had nothing to do with money. Almost asked her when she'd stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an obligation. But I didn't, because I was afraid that if I started talking, I'd say things I couldn't take back. Things that would ruin whatever fragile connection we still had. So I stayed quiet. I smiled. I agreed. I signed checks I couldn't afford and took on extra shifts and told myself that on the wedding day, when she saw how beautiful everything was, she'd understand. She'd hug me and thank me and maybe, finally, tell me that she appreciated everything I'd done. That's what I was still hoping for, sitting at table 14 in that ivory and gold ballroom, as my daughter stood with her champagne glass raised and her eyes locked on mine. I should have known better. The ballroom snapped back into focus with brutal clarity. The chandeliers, the silk tablecloths, the 200 faces turning toward me like sunflowers tracking the sun. Except there was no warmth here, only the cold spotlight of public humiliation about to descend. Juliet's eyes found mine across the expanse of ivory and gold. Her face was composed, almost serene, like she'd been practicing this moment in the mirror. Maybe she had. Maybe Madison and Sienna had helped her rehearse, told her she was being brave and authentic, convinced her that what she was about to do was self-care instead of cruelty. The champagne glass in her hand caught the light, sending fractured rainbows across the white tablecloths, across the shocked faces of guests who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something they shouldn't be. You can leave. 3 words, 9 letters, 1 breath. The glass slipped from her hand, not Juliet's but someone's at a nearby table. It hit the floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden absolute silence. No one moved to clean it up. No one moved at all. I felt the words hit my chest like physical blows, one after another. You can leave, present tense, not past. Not you could have skipped tonight or you didn't have to come, no. You can leave, right now, an order, a dismissal, the way you'd tell an unwanted solicitor to get off your porch, a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. At the friends' table, Madison's mouth had fallen open. Trevor's face had gone pale. Even they understood that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. This wasn't the empowering moment Juliet had probably sold them on. This was something else entirely. The room held its breath, 200 people frozen in a single moment of collective horror, all of them waiting to see what I would do. Would I cry? Would I scream? Would I beg my daughter to take it back, to explain what I'd done to deserve this? I did none of those things. My body moved on autopilot, some ancient survival instinct taking over when my brain shut down from the shock. My hands released the mangled napkin in my lap. My legs straightened, pushing my chair back from the table. The sound of wood scraping against marble was deafening in the silence. I stood. My legs were shaking. I could feel them trembling beneath the cream-colored dress, my knees threatening to buckle. But I locked them, forced them to hold me upright, refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. Not here. Not in front of people who would turn this moment into a story they'd tell at dinner parties for years to come. My vision had gone strange, like I was looking at the world through water. The faces around me blurred and sharpened randomly. Patricia's expression of absolute horror, a groomsman whose name I didn't know staring with his fork halfway to his mouth, John's grandmother pressing her hand to her chest like she might have a heart attack right there at the family table. I reached for my purse. My hands were shaking too, but I managed to close my fingers around the small clutch, that second-hand bag I'd bought to match the second-hand dress. It felt impossibly light, insufficient as a shield, but it was all I had. I clutched it against my stomach like it could somehow protect me from the wave of humiliation threatening to drown me. The door was at least 50 feet away. Might as well have been 50 miles. I turned toward it, moving with a deliberateness that felt disconnected from my body. It was like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my skin, observing this woman in the cream dress beginning the longest walk of her life. Look at her, I thought distantly. Look at how straight she's holding her spine. You'd almost think she had dignity left. The first step was the hardest. My heel, the worn-down pump from my cousin's funeral, clicked against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the terrible quiet, amplified to absurd proportions. Click. Everyone heard it. Everyone was listening to the rhythm of my retreat. I took another step. Click. Someone at a nearby table shifted in their seat, the sound of fabric rustling unnaturally loud. I kept my eyes forward, focused on that door, refusing to look at the faces I knew were watching me, cataloging every detail of my humiliation. 3 steps. 4. My vision was swimming now, tears building behind my eyes that I absolutely could not let fall. Not yet. Not until I was outside, away from this ballroom and these people and my daughter who had just excised me from her life, in front of everyone who mattered to her. Where would I go? The thought surfaced through the shock. I'd taken an Uber here, $15 I shouldn't have spent, but I'd wanted to have a glass of champagne, wanted to celebrate my daughter's wedding without worrying about driving home. Now I'd have to order another Uber. Another $15, maybe $20 with surge pricing on a Saturday night. Money I didn't have in an account that was already overdrawn. Should I wait outside, in the lobby? Would that be pathetic, standing there in my second-hand dress while the wedding continued without me? 5 steps. 6. Someone gasped, a small, stifled sound that they couldn't quite contain. I didn't turn to see who it was. Didn't want to know which guest couldn't maintain the pretense of composure while watching a mother get publicly disowned by her child. My purse strap dug into my palm where I was gripping it. I could feel the ridges of the cheap leather, the slight tackiness of the material. Everything was hyperreal suddenly, the temperature of the room slightly too warm, the smell of the floral arrangements, lilies and roses that cost $6,000, the texture of the air thick with shock and pity. 7 steps. 8. I'd made it past the first cluster of tables, only 40 more feet, only a lifetime. I should have seen this coming. The thought was bitter, toxic. All those little moments over the years, the embarrassment about my jobs, the way she'd gradually stopped inviting me into her life, the coldness during wedding planning. They weren't anomalies, they were a trajectory, a slow-motion departure that had been building to this exact moment. And I'd ignored every warning sign, I'd made excuses, I'd told myself she loved me, that she'd appreciate my sacrifices eventually, that a mother's love was supposed to be unconditional, and that meant accepting distance, accepting coldness, accepting being shoved to the margins of your child's life, because that was just how modern parent-child relationships worked. 9 steps. 10. The click of my heels was the only sound in the ballroom now. Even the band had gone silent, instruments lowered, watching like everyone else. The wedding singer's microphone hung loose in her hand, forgotten. I thought about my hands, bleeding at 3 a.m. while I scrubbed toilets. I thought about falling asleep on the bus and waking up miles past my stop. I thought about cleaning that dance studio 3 mornings a week so Juliet could have ballet lessons. I thought about the retirement fund I'd liquidated, the loans I'd taken out, the $47,000 that would take me years to pay off. Money I'd spent so my daughter could have her dream wedding. Her dream wedding where I wasn't wanted. 11 steps. 12. I was halfway to the door, halfway to escape, halfway to whatever came after this, whatever life looked like when your daughter publicly declared you were no longer part of hers. At table 8, a woman I didn't know was crying. Actually crying, tears running down her face as she watched me pass. I didn't know if the tears were for me, or just from the awkwardness of the situation, the social horror of witnessing something this intimate, this devastating. 13 steps. 14. My legs were still shaking, but they were holding. My hands were still gripping my purse like a lifeline. My face. I had no idea what my face looked like. Blank, I hoped. Composed. Not revealing the way my chest was caving in, the way my heart was splintering into pieces small enough to slip through my ribs. The door was closer now, 20 feet, 15. I could see the ornate brass handle, could imagine the weight of it in my hand, the sensation of pulling it open and stepping into the lobby where maybe, finally, I could breathe again. Behind me, the silence held. No one spoke, no one moved to stop me. Certainly not Juliet, who had said her piece and was probably standing at the head table with her champagne, glass still raised. Her friends gathering around to tell her how brave she'd been, how important it was to set boundaries, how proud they were of her for choosing herself. 15 steps. 16, 17. The brass handle was right there, gleaming in the chandelier light. My hand reached out, my fingers closed around the cold metal, and then behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair. The sound came from behind me, not from my table, not from the periphery, but from the front of the room, from the head table where Juliet stood with her champagne glass and her triumph. I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around. My hand was still on the brass door handle, my entire body tensed for escape. It was probably someone leaving too, unable to bear the awkwardness of what they'd just witnessed. Or maybe a waiter, trying to slip out to give the guests privacy during this family implosion. But then I heard the footsteps, not the quick, embarrassed shuffle of someone trying to exit discreetly. These were purposeful, deliberate. the sound of dress shoes against marble, moving with the kind of intention that made people pay attention. The energy in the room shifted immediately. I could feel it even with my back turned, the way the collective focus pivoted away from me and toward whoever was moving. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch movement in my peripheral vision. John Walker was standing. My first thought, arriving with a fresh wave of humiliation that I didn't think I had room left to feel, was that he was coming to escort me out. The dutiful son-in-law smoothing over his new wife's cruelty with a gentle hand on my elbow and some quietly murmured apology. "I'm so sorry, Michelle. Let me walk you to your car. This is just... It's wedding stress, you understand." I didn't want his pity. Didn't want his kind eyes and his gentle voice making excuses for what Juliet had done. I'd take the humiliation, swallow it down like I'd swallowed down everything else over the years, but I couldn't bear the added weight of his sympathy. My hand tightened on the door handle. I'd pull it open before he reached me, slip out before he could say whatever well-meaning words he'd prepared. I'd spare us both that awkwardness. But John wasn't walking toward me. He was moving toward the center of the ballroom, toward the small space between the head table and the dance floor where Juliet had been standing moments ago. His movements were measured, controlled, the way someone moves when they're trying very hard to keep their composure. The room's confusion was palpable. Heads swiveled from me to John and back again, guests trying to understand what was happening, whether this was part of some planned speech or something else entirely. At table 6, I heard someone whisper, "What's he doing?" The words carried in the silence, audible to everyone. I released the door handle, turned fully around. I couldn't help it. Whatever was about to happen, I needed to see it. John's face wasn't what I expected. There was no anger there, no fury on his new wife's behalf. Instead, his expression held something deeper, more complex, profound disappointment mixed with what looked almost like sorrow. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, but his eyes looked pained. He positioned himself in the center of the room, equidistant between the head table and the door where I stood frozen. The symbolism of it wasn't lost on me, or on anyone else, judging by the way the whispers were intensifying. He wasn't choosing a side yet. He was standing in the middle, forcing everyone, especially Juliet, to pay attention. At the head table, Juliet's expression was changing. The serene composure she'd worn while dismissing me was cracking at the edges, uncertainty creeping in. Her champagne glass, still raised in what should have been a triumphant toast, now looked awkward, frozen mid-gesture. She lowered it slowly, her eyes fixed on her husband with something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. "John?" Her voice was small, questioning. "What are you—" He held up one hand, not aggressively but firmly, a gesture that said, "Wait, not yet, I need to speak first." The friends' table had gone completely quiet. Madison's face was pale, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by dawning horror as she began to understand that maybe, just maybe, they'd miscalculated. Trevor was staring at John with wide eyes. Sienna had her hand pressed to her mouth. John's mother, an elegant woman in her 60s whom I'd met exactly twice, both times briefly, was sitting at the family table with her hand on her chest, her face a mixture of shock and what might have been approval. She looked from her son to me and back again, and I saw her lips pressed together in a thin line. The seconds stretched like taffy, pulling longer and longer. John stood in the center of that beautiful ballroom, surrounded by ivory and gold, 200 guests holding their breath, and he said nothing. Just stood there, his presence somehow commanding more attention than any words could have. I couldn't move, couldn't continue my walk to the door, couldn't return to my table. I was suspended in limbo, one hand still outstretched toward the brass handle, my body half-turned, caught between escape and whatever was about to unfold. "Is he stopping her?" someone whispered from table 12. The words barely audible but carrying nonetheless in the charged silence. "I don't know," another voice replied. "What is he doing?" John's eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the guests, the elaborate decorations, the wedding he and Juliet had planned together. Then his gaze landed on his bride, and something in his face hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. Juliet took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "John, honey, what—" "Before anyone leaves this room," he said, his voice cutting through the silence with unexpected firmness, "there's a foundation we have to acknowledge." The room went impossibly more silent, Even the whispers died. Every eye was on John now, including mine, including Juliet's, whose face had gone from uncertain to genuinely afraid. John wasn't looking at the guests anymore. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking directly at his wife, at the woman he'd married less than 6 hours ago, and his expression held something I couldn't quite name. Disappointment, yes. But also something else. Something that looked almost like a ultimatum forming in real time. "You talk about sacrifice and happiness," he said, and I realized with a jolt that he was turning her words back on her, using the exact language she'd just used in her toast. "But you're forgetting the difference between the two." Juliet's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter this time. Someone at the head table caught it reflexively, but the movement was enough to show that her hands were shaking. John took a step closer to her, and another, closing the distance between them until they were standing face to face. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but somehow carried even further, every syllable perfectly clear. "You're forgetting the woman who has worn herself down to the bone to ensure you never went without." He turned then, slowly, deliberately, until he was looking directly at me. At Michelle Howard, standing by the door in her second-hand dress with her worn-down shoes and her bleeding heart. "You're forgetting your mother." The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as John stood there, his eyes moving from me back to Juliet. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, controlled, but there was an undercurrent of steel I'd never heard from him before. "Do you know what my Aunt Patricia told me 3 months ago?" he asked Juliet, his tone conversational despite the weight of the moment. "Patricia Carter, she works the night shift at Morrison Financial Tower, has for 20 years. I felt my heart stop. Mrs. Carter, Patricia Carter, John's aunt, was the woman who'd worked alongside me for 2 decades, who'd seen me at my lowest, who knew every detail of my struggle because we'd shared it in those long, quiet hours between midnight and dawn. She didn't want to tell me at first," John continued, his eyes never leaving Juliet's face. "Said it wasn't her place, that your mother would be mortified if she knew. But after I told her about the wedding planning, about some of the things you'd been saying about Michelle, she sat me down and told me the truth." Around the room, guests leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story. At the head table, Juliet had gone completely still, her face pale. "Your mother didn't work 2 jobs, Juliet," John said quietly. "She worked 3, sometimes 4, for 21 years, from the time your father died until the day you graduated law school. Michelle Howard worked 16-hour days, every single day. The number hung in the air, 16 hours a day, for 21 years. She'd finish her receptionist job at 5 p.m., John recounted, his voice steady but gaining intensity. Then she'd take the bus to the restaurant, work the dinner rush until 11, then another bus to the office building where she'd clean until 6 a.m., then straight back to the dental office to start again." He paused, letting the logistics of that schedule sink in. I saw people doing the mental math, their faces changing as they realized what that meant. 3 hours of sleep, if I was lucky. That was her life, John said. For 21 years. Patricia calculated it. 122,000 hours of work. 122,000 hours of your mother's life spent scrubbing floors, washing dishes, cleaning toilets so you could have opportunities she never had. A woman at table 11 made a choked sound. Several people were crying now. John's expression hardened slightly. "And do you know what Patricia told me was the worst part?" Juliet shook her head, tears already streaming down her face. "Your mother missed almost every important moment of your life," he said, each word deliberate and devastating. "She missed your dance recitals because she was working the dinner shift. She missed your high school graduation ceremony because she couldn't get the night off, and if she didn't show up, she'd lose the job." I saw Juliet's face crumple at that. She'd been so angry about graduation. I'd told her I was sick, let her believe I didn't care enough to push through a cold. The truth, that I'd begged my supervisor for the night off and been denied, that I'd sobbed while scrubbing toilets at 3 a.m. because I was missing my daughter's milestone. That truth had seemed too pathetic to share. "She missed your college orientation because she was working a double shift to pay your housing deposit," John continued. "She missed your law school acceptance celebration because she'd picked up an extra cleaning job that night." He took a step closer to Juliet. "But do you know what she didn't miss? What Patricia says your mother never, ever missed, no matter how exhausted she was." The room was absolutely silent. "She never missed paying your bills. She never missed sending you money when you called asking for it. She never missed making sure your life, your milestones, your celebrations, your memories with your friends were perfect and memorable, even if she couldn't be there to see them herself. The words hit like physical blows. I watched Juliet's face as each one landed. Your spring formal in high school? John's voice was relentless now. Patricia said your mother worked 96 hours that week so she could buy you that dress you wanted, the one you had to have because Madison was wearing designer. Madison's face flushed crimson. She looked down at her lap. Your 21st birthday party in Miami? John continued. Your mother worked every single day for 2 months without a day off to send you that money. Patricia said she came to work one night with pneumonia, could barely stand, but she worked her full shift because missing work meant missing a payment. Around the room I heard gasps. At the friends' table Sienna was crying. Trevor had his head in his hands. Your graduation trip to Europe with your friends? John's voice rose. Patricia said your mother took on a 5th job, cleaning houses on weekends, so she could give you $3,000 for that trip. She scrubbed floors so you could take selfies in front of the Eiffel Tower. He turned slightly, his voice dropping lower but carrying even further. Patricia told me something else that broke my heart. She said that every time you called your mother, every single time, Michelle would come to work the next shift glowing, actually glowing with joy because her daughter had called her. My hand pressed against my mouth. Patricia had noticed that? All those years she'd been watching, understanding what those brief phone calls meant, and over the past 5 years, those phone calls got fewer and farther between, John said, his voice rough with emotion. Patricia watched your mother make excuses. She's so busy with school. She's focusing on her career. Patricia knew the truth. She knew you were pulling away, embarrassed of your mother, of where you came from. The ballroom felt electric with emotion. People weren't just crying, they were shaking with it. Your happiness today, this dress, this venue, this celebration, every single bit of it was built on 16-hour days that your mother worked for 21 years, John said, his voice ringing clear and strong. Every moment of joy you've had was paid for by your mother missing her own moments with you. He paused, and I saw tears streaming down his face now. She worked herself to exhaustion so you could have the childhood she never had. She sacrificed her health, her future, her own happiness. She sacrificed being present in your life so that your life would be beautiful and full. His voice broke slightly. She raised you alone from the time you were 2 years old. Your father died, and she had less than $1,500 and a toddler and a future that must have looked terrifying. But she figured it out. She worked those jobs. She bled for you. Literally, Patricia told me about the chemical burns, the scars on her hands. She had the electricity cut off during your finals week because she'd used that money for your SAT prep course. She liquidated her entire retirement fund for this wedding. $47,000 in debt that she'll be paying off for the rest of her life. The room was silent except for the sound of crying. That isn't just love, John said quietly. That's a woman erasing herself so her daughter could shine. And you, his voice caught, you just told her she can leave. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply someone else telling your truth. Subscribe if you believe in justice. Juliet's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table for support, her face destroyed by tears and the crushing weight of understanding. That isn't choosing happiness, John said. That's choosing to forget where you came from. That's erasing the woman who gave up everything for you. Your happiness today is built on her sacrifice, not in spite of it. He looked at me then, standing by the door with tears streaming silently down my face, and his expression softened with compassion and respect. To deny her presence is to deny the very struggle that got you here. His voice dropped to barely a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the ballroom. And I can't start a marriage with someone who would do that to the person who sacrificed everything for them. The implication hung in the air. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about them, about whether their marriage could survive this moment. Juliet looked up at him, her face a portrait of absolute devastation, and something inside her finally, truly broke. For a moment, nothing moved. The ballroom was frozen in time, 200 people suspended in the aftermath of John's words, waiting to see what would break first, the silence or Juliet herself. It was Juliet. The sound that came from her throat was raw, primal, not quite a sob, not quite a scream, but something in between. Her face contorted, every carefully constructed wall she'd built over the years crumbling in real time. The serene bride who'd stood moments ago dismissing her mother was gone, replaced by something broken and terrified and finally, devastatingly aware. Her wedding makeup, applied so perfectly just hours ago, began to run in black rivers down her cheeks. She didn't wipe it away, didn't seem to notice. Her hands had moved to her chest, clutching at the bodice of her Vera Wang gown, as if she couldn't breathe, as if the weight of realization was physically crushing her lungs. "John, she gasped, reaching for him, but he took a step back. Not cruel, not rejecting, just waiting. Waiting for her to understand the full magnitude of what she'd done. Madison stood abruptly from the friends' table, her face flushed with indignation that looked almost desperate. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice shrill in the quiet. "Juliet has every right to set boundaries with toxic. Sit down." John's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Madison's protest like a knife. "You don't get to speak right now. None of you do." Madison's mouth opened, closed. She looked around the table at Trevor, at Sienna, at the others, searching for support. But they were all looking away, shrinking into their seats, suddenly very interested in their napkins or their champagne glasses or anything that wasn't the scene unfolding before them. Because they knew. They'd always known, hadn't they? They'd known exactly what they were encouraging Juliet to do, what narrative they were feeding her, the narrative that made them heroes and Michelle the villain. The narrative that justified cutting ties with the past because the past was uncomfortable, unsophisticated, a reminder of poverty they found distasteful. Sienna was crying now too, but her tears looked different from the others in the room. They looked like shame. "I didn't know," she whispered to no one in particular. "Jules, I didn't know it was like that. You never told us, because I didn't want to remember." Juliet's voice cracked on the words, loud and anguished. She turned on her friends, her face twisted with something that looked like fury but was really despair. "I didn't want to remember being the poor kid. I didn't want to remember wearing secondhand clothes and lying about why I couldn't go on school trips. I didn't want to remember my mother showing up to school functions smelling like cleaning chemicals while your mothers wore Chanel." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest and devastating. Madison's face went white. Trevor was staring at his plate. The careful fiction they'd all maintained, that Juliet was one of them, had always been one of them, shattered like crystal hitting marble. John's voice was softer when he spoke again, but no less firm. "So you decided the solution was to pretend she didn't exist? To rewrite your history? To stand up here and tell her to leave rather than admit where you came from?" Juliet's knees buckled slightly. John didn't move to catch her, and after a moment she steadied herself against the table, her white-knuckled grip on the silk tablecloth the only thing keeping her upright. "I can't start a marriage built on dishonoring the woman who made you who you are," John said quietly, and the words landed like a death sentence. "I can't build a life with someone who would erase their own mother to impress people who—" he glanced at the friends' table with barely concealed disgust, "who aren't worth impressing." The ultimatum wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. It hung in the air between them, clear as the crystal chandeliers above. "Choose. Right now. Choose who you're going to be." Juliet's face was a battlefield. I could see it from where I stood by the door, the war raging behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to defend herself, to explain, to justify. Part of her was still that teenage girl who'd learned that shame about poverty was safer than pride, that distance from struggle was the price of admission to the world she wanted to inhabit. But another part, a part I thought I'd lost years ago, was remembering. I saw it in her face, the memories flooding back. Her eyes went distant, unfocused, seeing something other than the ivory and gold ballroom. She was 7 years old again, waking up on Christmas morning to find presents under the tree even though she'd heard her mother crying the night before about bills they couldn't pay. She was 12, excitedly showing her mother the acceptance letter to the dance intensive, not seeing how her mother's smile had frozen when she saw the $800 fee. She was 16, screaming, "I hate you," because her mother wouldn't let her go to that party. Not understanding that her mother was terrified, had been terrified every day since her father died, of losing her the way she'd lost him. She was 19, calling home from college to ask for money for textbooks, her mother's voice on the other end, exhausted but warm. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll transfer it tomorrow. How are your classes?" Brief conversations, increasingly rare, where her mother never complained, never asked for anything in return, just wanted to hear her daughter's voice. She was 25, bringing Chad home for Christmas, watching her mother's hands shake as she served dinner, seeing for the first time, really seeing, the scars, the way her mother moved like someone decades older, the worn furniture and patched curtains and all the visible evidence of poverty she'd trained herself not to notice. And Chad's barely concealed disdain, and her own burning shame that she'd tried to cover with coldness, with distance, with the lie that her mother had chosen this life, rather than having it forced upon her by circumstance and love. The cognitive dissonance that had protected her for years, the careful stories she'd told herself about boundaries and self-care and chosen family, shattered like glass. She saw it all clearly now, saw herself through John's eyes, through the eyes of the 200 guests, through her mother's eyes. She saw what she'd become. The sob that broke from her was devastating, a sound of grief so profound it seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Her legs gave out completely and she crumpled, her wedding dress billowing around her like a white cloud as she sank to her knees on the ballroom floor. "Mom," she gasped, the word barely audible. Then louder, anguished, "Mom!" Her hands reached out toward me, shaking, pleading. Mascara and tears had destroyed her face, transforming the sophisticated bride into a broken child who'd finally realized what she'd lost. She tried to stand, stumbled in her heels, nearly fell. John caught her elbow, not supporting her, not helping her, just steadying her enough that she wouldn't hurt herself. Then he let go, stepping back, making it clear this journey was hers to make alone. Juliet kicked off her heels, the expensive shoes clattering across the marble floor. In bare feet, her dress hiked up awkwardly in her fists, she took the first stumbling step toward me. And God help me, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run to her, to close the distance between us, to hold my daughter the way I'd held her when she was small and the world had hurt her. That instinct was so strong it was physical, a pull in my chest that made my feet want to move. But another part of me was rooted to the floor by the door, by the escape I'd been seconds away from taking. This was the daughter who'd just publicly disowned me, who'd spent years pulling away, ashamed of me, erasing me from her life. Could one speech from her husband really change that? Could one moment of realization undo years of deliberate distance? And beneath both of those reactions was something simpler, more devastating. I was so tired. Tired of sacrificing, tired of justifying, tired of making myself small so my daughter could feel big, tired of being invisible, tired of being erased. I wanted to collapse, just sink to the floor right there by the brass door handle and let the exhaustion of 21 years finally claim me. Juliet took another step, then another. She was crying so hard she could barely see, her hands outstretched, reaching for me across the expanse of ballroom floor that had never looked wider. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Behind her, the guests watched in absolute silence. Some were crying, others looked like they were holding their breath. At table 14, Patricia Carter had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Another step. Closer now. Close enough that I could see every detail of my daughter's destroyed face, every crack in the armor she'd built, every piece of the girl I'd raised finally showing through. My hand released the door handle. I hadn't realized I was still gripping it until my fingers unclenched, stiff and aching. Juliet was 10 feet away, 5 feet, close enough to touch. We stood there, mother and daughter, separated by 3 feet of space that felt like a canyon, like an ocean, like the accumulated weight of every missed moment and unspoken hurt. "I forgot," Juliet whispered, her voice destroyed. "I forgot everything. I forgot who you were. I forgot what you did. I forgot—" Her voice broke completely. "I forgot how to love you the way you loved me." Her arms opened, reaching, pleading, offering the embrace I'd been desperate for through years of coldness. And I had to decide, was this real? Was this enough? Could a person change in a moment? Or was this just the shock talking, the public pressure, the fear of losing John? But then I looked at my daughter's face, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the sophisticated lawyer, not the embarrassed teenager, not the distant stranger. I saw my little girl, broken and ashamed and finally understanding the cost of what she'd almost thrown away. My arms moved before my brain could stop them. Juliet closed the final 3 feet between us in a rush, nearly tripping over her wedding dress. She crashed into me with the force of 21 years of distance finally collapsing, and I caught her, my arms wrapping around my daughter for the first time and longer than I could remember. We sank to the ballroom floor together, her dress pooling around us in white silk, and we held each other like we were drowning. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Juliet sobbed into my shoulder, the words tumbling out between gasps. "Mom, I'm so sorry. What did I do? What did I almost do?" Her whole body was shaking, her hands clutching at my dress, my arms, anywhere she could hold on. I forgot. I forgot everything. I forgot you. I forgot where I came from. My own tears were falling now, silent and overwhelming. I couldn't speak, couldn't find words big enough for this moment. So I just held her, rocking slightly the way I used to when she was small, my hand stroking her hair. "I just wanted you to be happy," I finally whispered. "Sweetheart, I just wanted you to be happy. That's all I ever wanted." "I know," Juliet sobbed. "I know. And I was so cruel. Mom, can you forgive me? Please, please tell me you can forgive me." John knelt beside us, his arms coming around both of us, creating a circle where there had been a chasm. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together." Then the ballroom erupted. The applause started slowly and built into a wave washing over us. Not polite wedding applause, but something real and emotional. People were standing, clapping through their tears, and the sound was deafening and cathartic. I looked up, still holding my daughter, and saw strangers crying for us. Saw John's mother with her hand over her heart. Saw Patricia Carter beaming through tears. John helped us both to our feet. Juliet's dress was wrinkled, her makeup destroyed, her hair falling from its elaborate updo. She looked nothing like the sophisticated bride from an hour ago. She looked young and broken and real, and she was holding my hand like she'd never let go. Guests began approaching, not to Juliet, but to me. An elderly woman from John's family took my hand, her voice shaking. "I raised 3 children on my own after my husband passed. I know what you did, and you deserved better than what happened tonight." Others followed with apologies, with tears, with embraces. John's father approached, his face serious but kind. "We should have made sure you were treated like family from the beginning. That changes now." The friends' table remained conspicuously quiet. Madison had her purse in her lap, preparing to leave. One by one, they slipped out. Juliet watched them go, her hand tightening in mine, but she didn't try to stop them. She just let that chapter of her life close. John guided us toward the head table, but Juliet shook her head. "No. Mom should be at the family table. She should have been there from the beginning." So they made space, and suddenly I was seated between John's parents, in a place of honor, no longer hidden in the back corner. Someone brought me water. Someone brought me cake. John's sister slipped off her flats under the table. "We're about the same size. Take these." These small kindnesses after years of invisibility almost broke me again. Juliet stood then, shakily, and asked for the microphone. The room quieted. "I need to say something," she began, her voice hoarse but steady. "Earlier tonight, I gave a toast about chosen family. I said those things because I was a coward. I was ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of my mother's jobs, ashamed of being poor. And I dealt with that shame by erasing my mother from my story." Her voice broke, but she pushed through. "But my mother is my story. She's every good thing I have, every opportunity I've been given. She raised me alone, worked 16-hour days for 21 years so I could have this life. And I repaid her by telling her to leave, by forgetting everything she'd done." She turned to me, her face open and raw. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway, and I promise in front of everyone here that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given me." The applause that followed was quieter, more reverent. Juliet sat beside me and took my hand. "I love you," she whispered. "I've always loved you. I just forgot how to show it." "I know, baby," I said, squeezing her hand. "I know." The reception continued, transformed. The energy was different, softer, more genuine. People talked in small groups, sharing stories. Patricia Carter joined us at the family table. Juliet didn't leave my side for the rest of the night, hovering, desperate, trying to make up for years of distance in a single evening. I knew it would take time. One apology couldn't erase years of hurt. We had difficult conversations ahead, a relationship to rebuild. But for tonight, it was enough to sit where I was wanted, to hold my daughter's hand, to be seen and valued instead of hidden and erased. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this message." Around midnight, as the reception wound down, John sat beside me. "Thank you for what you did," I said quietly. He shook his head. "I just told the truth. Patricia told me everything, and I couldn't stay silent." He paused. "You're family now, really family." Beside me, Juliet had fallen asleep with her head on my shoulder, exhausted. I stroked her hair gently, the way I used to when she was small, and felt something in my chest finally, slowly begin to heal. The girl I'd raised was still in there. I hadn't lost her after all. The weeks following the wedding were not a fairy tale. There was no magical erasure of years of hurt, no instant return to the mother-daughter bond we'd once shared. But there was something more valuable, the slow, painful, necessary work of rebuilding. Juliet and John went on their honeymoon to Greece, but unlike previous trips where I'd hear from her once or twice in 2 weeks, my phone lit up daily. Photos of sunsets over Santorini with captions like, "Wish you were here, Mom." Video calls where Juliet cried and apologized again, and I cried and told her we'd figure it out. John in the background, giving us space but present, supportive. When they returned, we started family counseling, sitting in that therapist's office, facing each other across a coffee table scattered with tissues. We had the conversations we should have had years ago. Juliet explained her resentment, how she'd felt suffocated by my sacrifice, guilty for wanting things I couldn't afford, ashamed of the visible poverty that marked us as different. "Every time you gave me something, I felt like I owed you my whole life," she admitted, her voice breaking. "And I resented you for making me feel that way, even though you never asked for anything." I shared my hurt, the loneliness of working 16-hour days while my daughter pulled away, the humiliation of being hidden, the exhaustion of sacrificing everything only to be treated like an embarrassment. "I enabled you," I said, the words difficult but necessary. "I never taught you the cost of things because I wanted to protect you from the struggle, but in protecting you, I made myself invisible." Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, guided us through the minefield of guilt and resentment and love that had become our relationship. She helped Juliet see her privilege, helped me see my patterns of self-erasure. Slowly, painfully, we began to understand each other. Then the video went viral. Someone at the wedding had recorded John's speech, and it spread across social media like wildfire. Within days, it had millions of views. My phone flooded with messages. Mothers thanking me for representing their struggles, adult children apologizing to their own parents, strangers sharing their own stories of sacrifice and distance. The media requests came next. Morning shows, podcasts, magazine interviews. I declined them all initially, overwhelmed and uncertain. "This is private," I told Juliet. But she disagreed. "Mom, look at these messages. People need to hear this. You could help so many families." The financial reality, however, hadn't changed. Despite the emotional healing, I was still $47,000 in debt with interest accumulating daily. I'd started picking up extra shifts again, trying to chip away at the mountain of bills. Then Juliet and John showed up at my apartment one evening with a check. "We're paying off your debt," John said simply. "All of it." I stared at the check. $52,347.89, covering every penny plus the interest that had accumulated. "No," I said immediately, pushing it back across my small kitchen table. "Absolutely not. I don't want your money. I didn't do any of this for money." "We know," Juliet said, tears in her eyes. "That's exactly why we're doing this. Mom, you destroyed your future for my wedding. You have no retirement, no savings, nothing. We're not going to let you work yourself to death paying off debt you only have because of me." "It's not charity," John added. "It's honoring your sacrifice. It's letting you finally rest." We argued for an hour. I was stubborn, proud, afraid that accepting the money would somehow diminish what I'd done or change our slowly healing relationship. But eventually, I understood. Refusing the help was just another form of self-erasure, another way of saying my needs didn't matter. I took the check. And for the first time in 21 years, I quit one of my jobs. Just one, but it felt like a revolution. Patricia Carter and I started talking about the messages we'd been receiving, the stories pouring in from families struggling with similar dynamics. "Someone should do something," she said one night over coffee. "There are so many parents being abused, neglected, erased by their own children. Someone should help them." We looked at each other and the idea took root. Not fully formed yet, but growing. something that could turn my pain into purpose, my story into a catalyst for change. "Maybe that someone is us," I said quietly. Patricia smiled. "Maybe it is." 1 year later, I stood in a conference room at the downtown Hilton, looking out at 200 faces. Parents, adult children, social workers, lawyers, all gathered for the inaugural launch of the Michelle Howard Foundation. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That was new. 1 year ago, I was publicly humiliated at my daughter's wedding, I began, my voice clear and strong. Someone recorded that moment, and it went viral. Millions watched me experience the worst night of my life. And you know what? I'm grateful for it. Because that moment became the catalyst for everything we're launching today. The audience leaned forward, captivated. The Michelle Howard Foundation exists to protect parents being neglected, abused, or erased by their adult children. We provide legal advocacy when families exploit elderly parents financially. We offer support groups for mothers and fathers who've sacrificed everything. We create financial protection programs so no parent has to choose between their future and their child's present. I clicked to the next slide showing statistics. 1 in 10 Americans over 60 report experiencing elder abuse, most commonly by family members. We don't talk about it because we're uncomfortable with the idea that family can be the source of harm, but we must. Patricia Carter stood at the back, beaming. She'd retired from her night shift to work full-time with the foundation, and I'd cut back to one job to dedicate myself to this mission. We offer 3 core services, I continued. Legal advocacy for parents being financially exploited, family mediation when both parties are willing, and financial literacy workshops to help parents set boundaries before it's too late. I paused, looking at a woman in the third row crying quietly. "Your sacrifice matters," I said directly to her. "It deserves respect. And you deserve to have a voice, to set boundaries, to say I love you, but I can't destroy myself for you." The video of John's speech had been viewed over 15 million times. The wedding footage, once my deepest shame, now played in our foundation materials, illustrating how family dynamics can go wrong and how they can be repaired. Juliet had transformed completely. She'd become the foundation's biggest supporter, running Saturday support groups for adult children working to repair relationships with parents they'd hurt. Our relationship now was honest, boundaried, healthy. We had Sunday dinners where we actually talked, actually listened. We launched officially today, but we've been working quietly for 6 months, I said. We've mediated 43 family conflicts. We've provided legal assistance to 17 parents. We've held support groups that have helped hundreds feel less alone. I smiled. Tonight is also my daughter Juliet and her husband John's first anniversary. And this time, I'm genuinely invited. This time, I'm celebrated. This time, I'm part of the chosen family. The audience erupted in applause. Juliet came to the stage and hugged me, and this time the embrace was real, grounded in a year of hard work and honest conversations. Later, driving home in my used Honda Civic, I reflected on the journey. The worst moment of my life had become the catalyst for my greatest purpose. The public humiliation had become public vindication. My phone buzzed. A text from Juliet. "So proud of you, Mom. Love you." I smiled. "Love you too, sweetheart." Because sacrifice deserves acknowledgement, love deserves respect, and parents deserve to be seen, valued, and honored. Not just in crisis, but always. The Michelle Howard Foundation continues to help families heal. If this story resonated with you, consider supporting organizations that protect vulnerable parents. Like, subscribe, and share, because someone needs to hear that their sacrifice matters.